Okay, so welcome to the first panel of the day. Today it's a great pleasure to welcome Sonia Abroud, who is currently a PhD student at the Université de Caen Normandie. Her thesis is entitled Le cinéma hollywoodien des années 30, enjeux de la représentation d'une culture de consommation face à la crise économique et sociale. The project is supervised by Professor Penny Starfield, and she also teaches here at the University of Havre, Normandy, and her paper today is about consumer culture and women in Hollywood cinema of the 1930s.
Okay, thank you very much for this presentation. Well, hello everybody. First of all, I want to thank Professor Jean-Claude Gilbert for giving me this opportunity to participate in this conference. I'm very pleased to be here and to share some of my research and discuss it with you. So today, as the title of my paper indicates, I attempt via an intersectional approach to pinpoint how overlapping systems of discrimination operate when focusing on the depiction of the female character's link with consumption within a particular selection of movies of the 1930s. So this selection includes the following films: The Women, What Price Hollywood, A Star is Born, the original version. And what is interesting about those two movies is that they give us insights about film industry during the 1930s. So we may consider them as a sort of Hollywood self-examination. I shall also deal with the movie Our Blushing Brides and finally Babyface. The departure point of the study is the interplay that exists between women's status and consumption as represented within these movies. Such an interaction reveals the significance of consumption as a cultural entity in the expression of personal and collective identities of the female characters. I shall then analyze how social and gender discrimination converge and occur through the representations of these personal and collective characteristics. In other words, this paper aims at observing how women might be disadvantaged by multiple sources of oppression, like their class, but also gender, but also consumption as an identity marker. I intend then to explore the representations of the different profiles of female characters in terms of consumption, and then attempt to expose the stakes of such representations from an intersectional point of view. It has been common for the Hollywood industry to link consumption to women in films. When I say consumption, this might include the simple act of shopping, going to fancy restaurants or hotels, or just the display of personal material goods, such as clothes, jewelry, big cars, or exceptional houses with fancy dressing wardrobes. I'm quite sure that everyone here in this room might think of a movie or even a TV series in which consumption is closely associated to a female character at some point in the narrative trajectory. So here are some examples from more recent films: Pretty Woman and the mythical sequence when Vivian went shopping, or the movie The Devil Wears Prada, where professional success is represented by the character of Miranda Priestley. We also see in this movie that her intern, Andy Sachs, played by the actress Anne Hathaway, went through a style makeover to fit into Miranda's company and to be finally accepted by her boss. Finally, the movie Miss Congeniality, the movie Miss Congeniality, in which Sandra Bullock, who plays Gracie Hart, a very talented FBI agent, finally attracts her colleague Eric Matthews, who's been working with her for a very long time, after going through a complete transformation of her appearance in a beauty pageant contestant. This is to say that the association between consumption and women has often been represented within contemporary Hollywood movies, an association that also imply the reinforcement of some social and gender stereotypes regarding women's involvement in consumer culture. Now, let's travel in time and go back to the 1930s, this exceptional era in Hollywood production history known for its glamour and extravaganza. Consumption, according to the different but quite similar narrative trajectories of my selection of films, acts as an indicator of a female character's social status evidence for social upward mobility, a proof of her professional success, or even the reason behind what I like to describe as her tragic fall. So here, as in the previous movies that I showed you, the idea of transformation, or what seems to be more like a process of improvement of the female character appearance, thanks to the act of consumption, was also prominent in my selection of films. For instance, in What Price Hollywood and A Star is Born, the scenarios focus on the idea of transformation as an obvious and systematic step in the construction of a new social identity. This transformation is expressed through the display of material goods, such as the use of a specific kind of makeup, outfits, and of course, upgrading to a larger home. What was also interesting to notice is that this transformation goes hand in hand with engaging with the wealthy male characters in the movie. Let's start with What Price Hollywood, a movie who was directed by George Cukor in 1932. The storyline is quite similar to the other movies we're going to deal with, and it's about the social ascension of a girl, Mary Evans, played by the actress Constance Bennett, who is waitress in the legendary Brown Derby restaurant, and whose dream was to, in her term, go to Hollywood. Her career takes off when she meets a man, a drunken Hollywood famous but fading actor, and then she falls in love with a millionaire polo player socialite, Looney Borden, who can't bear to play a second fiddle to a movie star and divorced her when she was pregnant. So these are the first sequences of the movie that clearly set the ground for the idea of transformation. There is an alternation of close-up shots on either Photoplay, one of the most famous fan magazines during the 1930s, or on Mary's legs and then lips. Here you can observe the parallelism in the close-up shots. The number that you can see under the images corresponds to the order of the sequences. First, we see the advert of the sheer silk socks worn by the Hollywood actress Glinda Golden, and immediately after the shot, we see Mary wearing the exact same product. Then, the technique of shooting is done to shed the light on Mary's outfit, which looks like what the magazine refers to as the Hollywood star style. Also, and finally in sequence 6, we see her putting on the Max Factor kissable lipstick, also shown in the magazine. We can say that it's a pure emulation of a Hollywood star that seems accessible. The notion of accessibility was encouraged by Hollywood industry during the 30s as it conveyed beauty culture standards of that era. Beauty culture was directly linked to the placement of products consumed by the movie stars in fan magazines such as photoplays, but also to the reinforcement of the phenomenon of what was called at the time the cinema shops, in which American women could buy outfits that are similar but cheaper than the stars' costumes. At the beginning of the movie, Mary is still a waitress who is waiting for a miracle to become a famous actress. And the miracle is, of course, a male character who pops in the narrative trajectory and acts as a kind of a stepping stone towards the female character's success. So when the transformation process is done with success, social mobility is expressed through the display of consumption like we see here. The next movie, A Star is Born, directed by William Wellman, who was, by the way, accused of plagiarism by the producers of What Price Hollywood in 1937, also highlights the idea of metamorphosis as an indicator of social mobility. Its script has so many common points with What Price Hollywood, except for the profile of the main female character, Esther Blodgett, played by Janet Gaynor, who at the beginning of the movie is less sophisticated than Mary Esther. So this character is a young girl from North Dakota who came to Hollywood to realize her dreams of stardom without a clue about how this business works. Here again, the lead actor, Esther, meets an alcoholic actor living a professional decline, and contrary to Mary, who chose a husband who would help her escalate the social ladders, Esther is represented as more passive and very empathetic towards her partner, who ends up committing suicide at the end of the movie. In terms of consumer culture, this movie also presents Hollywood industry as the symbol of success that is expressed in material terms. Being a movie star is presented as the ultimate American dream for Esther. The idealization of this industry that expresses success through the display of consumption would lead in its turn to the idealization of consumer culture. The idea of the metamorphosis that leads to a new representation of women within the films was analyzed by Veronica Pradelli in her books Classic Hollywood, Lifestyle and Film Styles of the American Cinema. She states, and I quote, "Through formal devices drawn by the silent period, American cinema of the early 1930s expressed the new woman's condition through visual spectacles that cinematically represented the ideas of movement and metamorphosis, as well as the experience of excessive visual sensations typical of modernity. More specifically, cinema's mode of representation relied on a convergence between plots of female emancipation and visual attractions." There are different layers of social and gender discrimination linked to consumption that intersect in both movies. The gender discrimination is obvious in the normalized link between the leader's character success and transformation. Transforming Esther and Mary implies making them prettier and improving them according to the pre-established beauty culture. This shows that consumption is included in the process of metamorphosis into a Hollywood star, but here consumption is meant to change. Consumption is transformed in its turn into an identity mark. The second layer of discrimination is also a gender one, as success is never achieved without the interference of male characters. Another gender discrimination here is the fact that marital status seems to be threatened by the professional status of the female characters. Mary's husband in What Price Hollywood divorced her when she was at the onset of her career and reconquered her when she abandoned acting. Esther's husband, on the other hand, commits suicide. The last discrimination is a social one, as achieving wealth equals realizing the American dream. From an intersectional point of view, the discrimination here, in this case, squared. In the movie The Women, social and gender discriminations are illustrated in this George Cukor satire film, which is a 100% female cast, showing us the daily life of a clique of high society women. This film is interesting to study as it sheds the light on the social experience of a shop girl in terms of consumption. The shop girl is a popular cultural figure that is very present in classic movies during the 30s. Here again, social ascension is at the core of the plot, and again expressed by the shop girl display of extravagant consumption. But in my depiction of this particular figure, we'll see that from an intersectional approach, the notion of privilege, and in this case, the privilege of consumption, that the high society women benefit from, might be another cause of oppression towards female characters. The least we can say about this movie is that it is really ahead of its time, a kind of Desperate Housewives classic age style. The Women puts the marriage of Mary Haynes, played by the actress Norma Shearer, at the center of the plot. This marriage was destroyed by what her women friends referred to as the perfume counter girl, played by Joan Crawford. The opening scene occurs in the Temple of Consumption, a beauty and fitness center. Here we have another sort of association that is systematic between women belonging to a high society and attending in masses this kind of institution, which here again, like the other movies, insists on the idea of making a woman prettier. Now let's have a look on the opening scene of the movie and on another selected extract.
Sure is nice and sweet, but you need some perfume on your friend.
Oh, good morning, all. Oh, good grief. Wouldn't you think women would leave beasts like that at home? All the fine
my little assistant. She's somebody's little playmate. Now hurry, here's her special drinking water.
Well, she don't ever want to drink, Miss Bennett.
Ah, but you never can tell. Someday she may. Oh, she cries for me, Ollie. Just tell her that Muddy's making us have a perfectly beautiful, just a very little anything. Good morning, Mrs. Cole and I being done together. Is she hearing it?
Oh, yes. You're going to have a manicure, shampoo, facial, and everything.
Oh, look at Sydney's miniature. Miniature. Sure sound of a penny line.
They've been waiting half an hour, Mrs. Spencer. Would you mind seeing the art exhibit later?
Oh, all right. Art exhibit, my foot. I want to move your hand.
Oh, Spencer.
Look here, Mrs. Spencer.
Oh, I'm very
Lady, now, would you place in there for a moment?
These.
Good grief. I hate to tell you, dear, but your skin makes the Rocky Mountains look like chiffon velvet.
Only half a minute more, Mrs. Miller, and you can talk again.
Oh, I beg your pardon. I'm looking for Grandma. Grandma isn't in there.
Well, she isn't in here. Oh, this mud has worms in it. I know it has worms in it. I can feel them.
They're probably more scared of you than you are of them. Well, what's a little worm one, Hob and yell? They eat them.
Relax. Rest and close your eyes.
All right. But I still say I'm gonna pull a gun on that guy. Just like I did on Judge. But I still say I'm gonna pull a gun on that guy. Just like I did on Judge McClure.
I'm coming. Oh, my dears. Just think that solid mountain of flesh is going to marry a jockey. Won't her husband barely turn over in his grave? Now, what's she got in common with a jockey?
Odds heavens.
Yes, miss?
Oh, well, she's all right, Miss Denver. She's my pet agent.
Has anybody seen my grandmother? She's solvent.
That sound is in that direction.
Well, Grandma! Oh, darling, where have you been? 4 miles, may I go to the fight tonight? Not without me.
Okay, now let's watch the second extract. Alors.
Yeah, here's what it is.
Now, Edith, don't tell me. I just want pounds in Bermuda.
Walk in, darling. I hope it's not from worry.
No. The topics are swell for the figure.
Now, what'd you wear down there, dear?
Flags both there are terribly sloppy.
Oh, when I was down traveling alone. You ought to load up on clothes for Stephen, dear. Is he taking you out much?
Yes, lots.
Come on, girls, let's sit down.
She can't take it.
Bonjour, mesdames, mesdemoiselles. It gives me great pleasure to be your cicerone on our adventurous little voyage into Fashionland. But today, ladies, as an innovation, you will see the models go through the rhythmic movement of everyday life, and you will be able to study the flow of the new life as it responds to the ever-changing flow of the female form divine. Et maintenant, our little peep into the coming season. And a glimpse of the future, too. Lumière, musique.
Okay, I think everybody knows the ring. All right. So the second extract I'm sorry. Is it working? All right, okay. So the second extract showing the fashion show sequence lasts 7 minutes in the movie, which is a considerable amount of time. This is also reinforced the idea of consumer culture that is expressed in this film. Actually, including long fashion shows within films was very common in Hollywood during the 1930s. We can find them in other famous films like Roberta, Vogues of 1938, Street of Women, and Our Blushing Brides. Now, concerning the figure of the shopgirl and how it is represented in terms of consumption, it is important to mention that the popularity of films featuring working women is linked to the economic and social framework of the 1930s depression. I don't have exact figures or statistics of women spectators who were likely to be working as men's unemployment increased considerably after the economic crash of 1929. But we might suspect that this historical fact played a role in the popularity of the figure of the shop girl. In today's selection of movies, women's autonomy is represented. However, it is often linked to middle or working class classes, and once a female character gets married to a wealthy man, she often stops working. If she keeps working and is successful, she would probably lose her husband, as in Star is Born and What Price Hollywood. In The Women, the idea of professional position as a threat to marriage is obvious when Mary's Haynes friend talks about why her husband wanted to get the divorce. She says, and I quote, "When I think of the things he said to me, my Johnny, he wouldn't let me buy a car with my money. Just because he couldn't afford one, I can't have one. He wants me to be a slave. The only protection I have is my own little income." Here again, there is first a gender discrimination, as working women in this movie should choose between being married or having a successful professional position. And the combination of the two leads systematically to the marriage failure depicted in the movie as the female tragic fall. Going back to the shop girl figure, here, Crystal Allen relies on seducing Stephen Haynes to improve her social status. So at the beginning of the movie, she is working in a fancy perfume shop, and we see her behind the counter. All the women behind the counter, and thus the shop girl, belong to a modest social class. So the working girl in this movie belongs to a consumption framework, but could not afford the product she is selling. The purpose of Crystal is to become like the women who are on the other side of the counter. A high-class woman who in this movie doesn't need to work. And here we have our last layer of discrimination, which is privilege, that doesn't seem to be recognized by the women belonging to high society. Now let's carry on with the depiction of the shop girl figure in the movie Our Blushing Brides. We have three profiles of the shop girl, Jerry and who else? Jerry, Frankie, and Connie. And Frankie looks a lot like Crystal Allen in the movie The Women. So since I have 2 minutes, okay, let's go directly to, maybe we'll see the trailer of the last movie, Babyface, because it's really interesting. Up. Alors, précédent.
My father, a swell start you gave me. Ever since I was 14, what's it been? Nothing but men, dirty, rotten men. And you lower than any of them. I'll hate you as long as I live. Oh, not here. Somebody might...
Okay, so the notion of punishment is palpable here in the trailer of our last movie, Babyface, as it is a sort of a warning addressed to the audience, as if it is stating, this is what happens when you break the rules. In the last movie, Babyface, social ascension is dealt with in a different way. It is a movie about a woman using the power of sex to get ahead in the world. Lily Power, starred by Barbara Stanwyck, had a horrible life when she was working at her father's speakeasy, a very violent man who never protected her from the abuse she was enduring from the bar customers. So maybe we'll have a look up. I don't have time. All right. So this is Mr. Gregg, a piece of advice that is the starting point of the plot in the film Babyface. As you can see, he is insisting on the fact that she should use men in order to escalate the social ladder. And finally, here a selection of sequences in which we see the exhibition of material goods linked to the assertion of Lily's social transformation into a high society dam. It follows the same pattern of evolution of the previous characters we have dealt with. In this movie, the power of Lily is expressed through the accumulation of money and wealth. And as the movie progresses, we feel that it becomes less empathetic toward this female character who was represented as a self-possessed capitalist. And at the end of the movie, Lily finally shows vulnerability and has a change of heart. This movie opens the path to consider women's sexual freedom as represented in Hollywood movies of the 30s and how it could converge along with class and gender oppression, consumption as an identity marker, and privilege to reinforce the expression of discrimination. To conclude, it was a very interesting exercise to apply an intersectional approach to classic movies, as this requires imagining the mindset regarding women of an era before we were even born, and looking at this era from a 21st century spectator's lenses and realizing the advances that have been made around feminist themes in film industry during the last years, but also how much work is still needed as discrimination is still expressed in the overlapping of different systems of oppression. And thank you very much for listening.